Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good evening to you all. I would like to welcome all of our participants in this introductory course to the Palestinian struggle, Israeli colonialism, and the Palestinian struggle, past, present, and future, organized by the Hashim Sani Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Malaya. This is Muslim Imran, and I will be discussing today several important issues related to the Palestinian struggle. In our previous sessions, we have discussed the background of the Israeli colonialism and the Palestinian struggle. We have delved into the ancient history of Palestine. We discussed the Zionist project and how it resulted in the creation of the Zionist state, the state of Israel. We have also discussed the history of the Palestinian people and how they resisted Israeli colonialism, as well as developed their own political organizations and political system. In today's discussion, we will highlight a few important major issues which are prerequisite to understand the ongoing reality in Palestine. Those of you who check the news today will see an ongoing genocide in Gaza. If you read about what's happening in the West Bank, you will see an apartheid in place. If you travel around, especially to the Middle East, you will probably encounter some Palestinian refugees in your interactions with the people of the region. And if you are lucky to visit Palestine and to go to places under direct Israeli rule now, you will also face and meet some Palestinians who have become subjects of the Israeli colonization and became citizens of the state of Israel. So the Palestinian people have been facing all sorts of Israeli atrocities, and they are, although not a very big population, but they are scattered across the world. In today's discussion, we will discuss some of the important issues related to the Palestinian people and to their cause. So, in today's layout, I will discuss the issues one by one, probably giving 5 to 10 minutes for each one of these important topics, and I'll open the floor for a few questions. Then we will move forward to the next issue. So this way, hopefully, we will do justice to the many issues that we will be discussing. In the slides you see here in the screen, we will touch on several important issues, including the right of return, Jerusalem and Judaization, illegal settlements, Palestinian prisoners, the siege on Gaza, Israeli apartheid, and the peace process. Now, of course, this is the fourth of a series of lectures. The fifth and final lecture will be discussing the contemporary developments in Palestine, especially the geopolitical dimensions. We start today with a discussion on the Palestinian refugees and the right of return. The Palestinian people have lived in Palestine for centuries. If we trace their roots back to the Canaanites, the first nation to develop a civilization in Palestine or the land of Canaan, we will be talking about thousands of years. Now, the Palestinian people from different Canaanite tribes have continued to live in their homeland for centuries and to mix with different rivaling civilizations, neighboring nations, including the Babylonians, Ashurians, Persians, Egyptians, other Arab tribes, as well as the Byzantine Crusaders and other nations. Throughout their past history, the Palestinians faced several invasions, faced several brutal attacks from the outside. Most notably is the Crusades. The Crusades, who sent a mission after another, massacred many Palestinians, especially in the city of Jerusalem, and erected several kingdoms and political regimes in historical Palestine. But none of these uh, missions to Palestine managed to uproot the whole Palestinian population. However, in the mid 20th century, after more than 50 years of colonial efforts by the British as well as the Zionist movement, the Zionist militias were successful, unfortunately, in 1947 in uprooting hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. In the short period of the Israeli so-called War of Independence, or the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, from November 1947 to about mid 1948, the Zionist militias, mainly Haganah, Stern, Ergun, and others, killed thousands of Palestinians, committed several massacres such as Deir Yassin, and opened some corridors for the Palestinian population to leave forcibly their homelands in several Palestinian cities and communities. So big Palestinian cities like Haifa, Yafa, Safad, and others were turned into uh, either new Zionist areas or turned into rubble and empty spaces. And those of you who see Israeli spokespersons now talking about Gaza, the way they talk, for instance, turning Gaza into a parking lot, that is actually not something new. That is something that has happened in the ancient history, or in the recent history of Palestine, in the modern history. In 1947, 1948, many Palestinian towns and cities, up to about 500 of them, were actually turned into either rubble or forgotten places. In many cases, these Palestinian villages and towns were covered by Israeli plantations in order to make sure that no Palestinian Arab heritage is visible to the visitor. So the Nakba, or ethnic cleansing, that took place in 1947 to 1948 resulted in more than 750,000 Palestinians being forced out of their home lands. Now, some would suggest that the number has actually reached more than 900,000, but 750 is not a small number. It was about two-thirds of the Palestinian population, the total Palestinian population. These people became refugees. And here comes the issue of the Palestinian refugees. The two-thirds of the Palestinian population in 1947 was sent into exile. The Palestinian population in diaspora continued to grow, and Palestinians continued to inhabit several neighboring countries. However, many of them had to resettle to distant locations. By now, in the third millennia, in the early years of the 21st century, there are at least 6 to 7 million Palestinian refugees living in diaspora. The biggest number of Palestinian refugees, of course, lives in neighboring Jordan. Some estimates suggest that half of the population of Jordan is made up of Palestinian refugees. But there are many Palestinian refugees elsewhere in countries like Syria and Lebanon. Estimates and United Nations statistics suggest that there are hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees still living there. In countries like Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians as well live there. In North America, some estimate that up to 250,000 Palestinians live there. In Latin America, there are also hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, most notably in Chile, where a large Palestinian Christian community has settled in that Latin American country. But in the Palestinian territories that were not occupied in 1948, some Palestinian refugees also moved in. So these could be seen as internally displaced Palestinian refugees, most notably in Gaza. More than 2/3 of the population of Gaza is a refugee population. Of course, there are some Palestinian refugee camps in the West Bank, but not as big and noticeable as those in Gaza. Many of you have heard, for instance, of the Jenin refugee camp, which Israeli army continues to attack every now and then. It was stormed into in 2002 and destroyed. It was again destroyed in 2022. But there are many other Palestinian refugee camps in the West Bank, including Al Arub, Al Fawar, Al Am'ari, Jenin, Balata, and Tul Karm, among other refugee camps. Gaza, again, has up to 1 million Palestinian refugees, probably more than 1 million Palestinian refugees, internally displaced since 1947, 1948. These Palestinians don't have the right to go back to their homeland. Although the United Nations dictated in many resolutions that the right of Palestinians to return to their homeland is guaranteed by international law and by the international resolutions, Israel continues to prevent these Palestinians from coming back to their own homeland. Meanwhile, any Israeli settler, any Jewish settler interested in becoming a citizen of Israel can just apply for so-called aliyah in order to be naturalized and become an Israeli citizen. In the last few decades, we have seen many Jewish communities with minimal links to Palestine and, in fact, to the Israeli community claiming to be Jewish and getting to migrate to Israel and to be immediately naturalized, becoming Israeli citizens. We see Ethiopian Jewish communities, Yemeni Jewish communities, as well as, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Soviet Russian Jewish communities moving to Israel and immediately getting citizenship in Israel. Many of these new communities do not even speak Hebrew or practice Jewish rituals. However, because of this racist Israeli immigration law, any Jewish anywhere in the world can become Israeli, even though they might have no ethnic, historical, or even cultural links to Palestine. But Palestinians who inhabited Palestine for thousands of years, but had to be forced out in 1947, 1948, cannot go back now to Palestine. In fact, some of these Palestinian refugees who come back to Palestine as visitors using other passports, like the American or European passports, are still subject to all sorts of humiliation by the Israeli immigration authorities. As of today, the Palestinian refugees continue to maintain their identity. Many of them continue to hold United Nations cards. A special agency was established in 1949 by the United Nations to take care of the Palestinian refugees, called the UNRWA, UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency in the Near East, taking care of the Palestinian refugees. And the Palestinians are most probably the largest continuous refugee community in contemporary history. There are up to 6 or 7 million Palestinian refugees who are still in exile up until today, unable to go back to their own homeland, even though many of them continue to maintain the documents of ownership of their own houses, lands, and other properties inside Palestine that turned into Israel, even though many of them continue to even keep the keys of their houses 75 years after being sent into exile. This attachment of the Palestinian refugees to their own homeland makes it difficult for Israel to erase their identity and existence, and makes it difficult to Israel to become a natural part of the region. Now, many of the Israeli migrant communities that stole Palestine in 1947, 1948 got easy houses and properties, because in 1947, 1948, over the course of less than 1 year, the Zionist terrorist militias were able to not only kick out 750 to 900,000 Palestinians out of their home land, they were also able to appropriate and steal houses, shops, buildings, cultural centers, cinemas, schools, banks, and other Palestinian properties. And according to American Palestinian comedian Amr Zahr, أخذوها مفروشة. Israel has actually taken Palestine fully furnished. It was not erected from nothing. It was not migrant communities turning desert into agricultural land. They did not make the desert bloom. They stole an already inhabited land with culture, history, and properties. So the amount of robbery that took place in 1947, 1948 is actually in the billions of dollars. And if it is compared to today's currency, it would probably be in the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. Anyway, the Palestinian refugees have not been able to restore their properties or been able to exercise their inalienable right to return to Palestine. The right of return is both individual and collective. So if an individual Palestinian decides to forsake his or her right of return, the collective right of the Palestinian people to return still exists. But history has shown that the absolute majority, if not all, Palestinian refugees would like to continue to demand their right of return to their own homeland. Even though the first generation of Palestinian refugees is disappearing, many of them, of course, have died, but their identity is passed down to the second, third, and fourth generation of Palestinian refugees. Now, looking at the demographics of Palestine, one will realize that at least half of the Palestinian population is refugee. Although many Palestinians from the West Bank, Gaza, and the 1948 lands continue to live in their own homelands, but their communities are divided by Israeli restrictions, and they do not represent a majority of the Palestinian people. So any political settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli struggle that ignores the right of 6 to 7 million Palestinian refugees to return home is not going to work. And in fact, this was one of the key issues why the peace process failed and collapsed several times. Israel continues to seek to throw out the rest of the Palestinian population from Palestine, let alone bring back Palestinians who have right to return. We see what's happening in Gaza today. A few days ago, Israeli National Security Minister Ben Gvir was suggesting on national TV forcing out a few 100,000 Palestinians from Gaza, saying that we can test with them and then later we can send others to other countries. In fact, Israel, with the help of the United States, has spoken to several countries, including Arab countries and Western countries, to take the Palestinian people of Gaza to their own countries. Why is that so? Because Israel has done this in 1947, 1948. They killed thousands, they massacred many, they destroyed neighborhoods and communities, and they forced out hundreds of thousands into exile. They think that their business is unfinished, and the best way to continue to control Palestine is by eradicating and eliminating the last remaining Palestinian community inside Palestine. The model of North America being wiped out of its original inhabitants, the Red Indians, is still fresh in the minds of Israeli decision makers. Therefore, our role in the international community is to prevent this from happening, not only by helping the Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, and inside Israel to continue to exist and maintain their identity and rights, but also by helping the Palestinian refugees all over the world to exercise their right of return, individual and collective right of return to Palestine. The Palestinian diaspora, to a large extent, was very active in the Palestinian national struggle throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, but unfortunately, after the start of the peace process and the decision to create the Palestinian Authority, these Palestinians in the diaspora were to some extent neglected by the Palestinian political leadership, and therefore their role in the Palestinian national struggle diminished to a huge extent. In 1994, the Palestinian Authority was established in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. 1996, the first Palestinian parliamentary and presidential elections were held only in the West Bank and Gaza. Again, in 2006, the parliamentary elections were held only in the West Bank and Gaza, creating the Palestinian Legislative Council and the Palestinian Authority's government. This, to a large extent, marginalized the role of the Palestinian diaspora. However, the Palestinian diaspora is still represented in the Palestinian National Council, but it has become an ineffective political institution because of lack of meetings and leadership. Now, for the Palestinian diaspora to play a major role in the Palestinian struggle, they have to push for political roles as well as roles in resistance, either by supporting their fellow Palestinians inside Palestine or by playing the role of the lobby of Palestine in the diaspora. We see that happening, for instance, in Europe, where Palestinians in Europe organize an annual event for the Palestinians called the Palestinians of Europe conference, sometimes attended by tens of thousands of Palestinians from across the continent. The Palestinians in other countries have not reached the same level of political organization, but by time I think the momentum of the Palestinian diaspora will start to grow further if the Palestinian political groups and institutions are able to engage them further. Now, the common thing amongst all these millions of Palestinians in the diaspora is that they all are Palestinians, Muslims and Christians, who would like to go back to their homeland in Palestine and who would contribute to rebuilding Palestine after its liberation, inshallah. So with this, we conclude our brief introduction about the Palestinians in the diaspora and the right of return. And I welcome any questions you have on this specific topic. Okay, if you have no questions yet, I will move to the next topic and we will eventually open the floor for more questions on the first and second topics. The next topic is still dealing with the Palestinian people. The first one is about the Palestinian refugees. The second one is about the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. Now, both of these topics deal with the Palestinian human. In Palestine, the struggle is for two things: the Palestinian person, the Palestinian human, the Palestinian community, and the Palestinian land. While the Palestinian land is a holy land, the Palestinian individual, the Palestinian community, is the one that has been subject to all sorts of Israeli atrocities and suffering. Therefore, any illustration of the Palestinian struggle has to encompass these two elements: the Palestinian people and the Palestinian land. In addition to the Palestinian refugees suffering for decades, either by living in difficult conditions in refugee camps, especially in Lebanon, and to some extent in Syria and Jordan, or inside the West Bank and Gaza, other Palestinians have been suffering inside occupied Palestine. Since the establishment of Israel, Israel has treated the Palestinians with military laws and uh, uh, restrictions. The Palestinians inside Israel were subject to emergency and military laws up until 1966. The Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are still subject to Israeli military law. And therefore, Israel has always securitized the Palestinian issue and has always seen the Palestinians as a threat, as a security threat. It has detained since 1967 more than 1 million Palestinian people. We are a small nation of about 6 million Palestinians inside Palestine, with about the same number in diaspora. So when we say 1 million Palestinians out of these 6 millions have been detained, we are talking about at least one Palestinian prisoner from every Palestinian family. Israel, in its detention policies, has violated so many international laws, most importantly, the Geneva Conventions for prisoners of war. Israel detains Palestinians inside Israel and inside occupied territories. It moves them according to its own security considerations. It tortures them. It sometimes kills them in detention. It happened to hundreds of Palestinians. It as well exercises all sorts of psychological and physical torture on these Palestinian prisoners. Now, the Palestinian prisoners, subject to all sorts of Israeli military laws and rules, have resisted even inside their own prisons and have organized themselves politically. They have, for so many years, demanded some of their basic rights. We see that especially in the prisoner strikes that take place every now and then, where sometimes individual Palestinian prisoners or hundreds and sometimes thousands of Palestinian prisoners go on hunger strikes for days, sometimes tens of days, in order to demand basic rights of a prisoner and to be treated with humanity. In some cases, Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails died during their hunger strikes. One of the most notable recent incidents was that of Sheikh Khadr Adnan, a senior Palestinian resistance figure who stayed on hunger strike for so many days until he just couldn't stand it anymore. This Palestinian hunger strike is one of the tools of resistance utilized by the Palestinian prisoners in order to embarrass Israel in front of the international community, especially that Israel continues to claim and brag about being a democracy. So it pushes the Israeli authorities to address the basic rights of these prisoners. But the basic problem remains. Israel breaks so many international laws by taking many of these Palestinians into detention. Most of the Palestinian prisoners are either on trumped up charges or imprisoned without even charges. In the case of administrative detention, Palestinians can be taken into Israeli jails without charges, with only some secret information that the Israeli prosecutor general can withhold from the victim and from the court. So, for decades, Israel has been treating the Palestinian prisoners according to its own whims and its own considerations. The Palestinians inside prisons and outside prisons have continued to pressure Israel through all sorts of civil disobedience activities, including protests and other forms of pressure. But the problem remains. Israel continues to break international law by detaining thousands of Palestinians. As we speak, the number of Palestinian prisoners since October has risen from 5,000 Palestinian prisoners up to almost 10,000 Palestinian prisoners. Now, from Palestinian experience, the only way to release these Palestinian prisoners has been through resistance activities. The main approach has always been capturing Israeli soldiers in order to exchange them for Palestinian prisoners. Who is there inside Israeli jails? We are talking about the elite of the Palestinian community, the top political leaders of the Palestinian resistance factions, talking about people like the Secretary General of the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, Ahmed Saadat, who has been in Israeli prison for more than 20 years. People like Marwan Barghouti, the Secretary General of the Fatah, one of Fatah's central councils, who has been in Israeli prison for more than 20 years. Talking about Abdullah al-Barghouti, Hassan Salama, and many other senior Hamas leaders who have been in Israeli jail for more than 20 years. In many cases, Palestinian prisoners spend more than 30 or sometimes 40 years in detention. People like Nail Barghouti have been in jail for more than 40 years. In the case of Nail Barghouti, I suppose it's 43 or even 44 years in detention. You can imagine being in jail for 40 years because of your political commitment towards your own nation and your struggle for emancipation. The Palestinian resistance over the decades has realized that the only way to pressure the Israeli government to release these Palestinian political leaders and Palestinian prisoners is through capturing Israeli soldiers to exchange them through prisoner swap deals. The most recent and most instrumental prisoner swap deal in the last 2 decades was that prisoner swap deal that took place in 2011. An Israeli soldier in the name of Gilad Shalit was captured from a military site near Gaza in 2006, and the Palestinian resistance had been able to take care of him in custody for several years until he was exchanged for about 1,027 Palestinian prisoners. Most probably the Palestinian leadership in October had this model in mind when they decided to take into custody several Israeli military leaders and commanders. Although the war in Gaza continues, but Palestinian resistance realizes that the best way to release Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails is actually by taking care of whoever they have captured in order to exchange them in a future prisoner exchange deal. Going back to the root cause, occupation is the reason why there are thousands of Palestinian prisoners. Occupation is the reason why more than 1 million Palestinians have been taken into Israeli detention over the years. And Israel's disrespect of international law is the reason why many Palestinians have died in custody, or why they continue to illegally detain thousands of Palestinians, especially under the administrative detention law, a law that was devised by the British colonization in the early days of the British mandate in Palestine in order to restrict the political movement of not only the Palestinian but also the Zionist movements themselves. Israel is utilizing a law that it knows very well is an inhumane, unfair law to treat prisoners through the facade of law, but in order to achieve, the goal of breaking the will of the Palestinian people. However, after decades of struggle, the Palestinians have turned these prisons into schools and universities. Thousands of Palestinians study inside these prisons, achieve an impressive level of education. Some have even earned their PhDs from behind bars, learning languages, writing theses, and writing and publishing books from behind the bars. So, after discussing the life of Palestinian people in diaspora and in Israeli prisons, we will move on to talk about Israeli policies towards the Palestinian land. But before that, let's have a look at some of the questions that we have here. Azra Muntaz, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ali Zaman, Assalamu alaikum. Zahke, what about Palestinians in the US? Michigan has the highest number of Palestinians. They are not a strong diaspora like in Europe. There is a large number of Palestinians in the US, and they are becoming more active politically. Very recently, we have seen a Palestinian becoming a congresswoman in the name of Rashida Tlaib. She's very active politically. Several other Palestinians have joined the political process in the United States in local councils. I think I don't recall which state, but some of them have become members of the local legislative councils. There are many NGO activists as well, but I have to point out that democracy in the United States is not as solid as that in Europe. Therefore, the restrictions on Palestinians and the risk for Palestinians to organize politically in the United States is higher than that in Europe. In the United States, some Palestinians, especially recently, have been subject to Islamophobic attacks by some of the terrorist American militias. They were killed in several occasions, including a little Palestinian child. Palestinians in the United States face the same difficulties that other Arab and generally colored communities face in the United States. And in the United States, the Zionist lobby is very strong and influential. So the Palestinians of the US face more difficulties, I would say, than those in Europe. But that's no reason for them to stop from organizing politically and demanding their own rights and pressuring the American administration. They are doing that, and I wish them the best in carrying on. But it's worth noting that the American government has in the past detained many Palestinian civil society activists. Some of them continue to be in American jails. They have at one point of time detained even Palestinian political leaders like Dr. Musa Abu Marzouk in American prisons. And they continue to sideline many Palestinian and generally Arab and Muslim communities from decision making. Now, looking at the United States particularly, several Palestinian Americans have left a lasting impact and legacy in the American intellectual life. I'll give some examples. One of them is Ismail Farouqi. Dr. Ismail Farouqi is one of the main contributors to the idea of the Islamization of knowledge and the triple IT, the institute in the United States. He was active amongst the Muslim community in the US and contributed significantly to the Islamic social sciences. There is another important name that had probably a more noticeable and more significant contribution to intelligentsia and to academia in the name of Edward Said. Dr. Edward Said was a Palestinian American linguist and political theorist who contributed significantly to post-colonial studies through his ideas on Orientalism. People like Edward Said have contributed a lot to the American academic life, but the impact of the Palestinian community in the US is not yet up to the impact that these notable intellectual figures I mentioned has reached. Assalamu alaikum, sir. UH. Do Palestinian authorities speak about the rights of prisoners in Israeli jail, or only the prisoners themselves speak? Of course, the Palestinian Authority and every Palestinian political organization and even major civil society group speak about the rights of Palestinian prisoners. In the Palestinian Authority, there is a special ministry in charge of Palestinian prisoners, Ministry of Palestinian Prisoners Affairs. In the PLO also, they are paid attention, and of course in the Gaza government and in the Palestinian political factions like Hamas, there is always a special portfolio dealing with Palestinian prisoners, because as I mentioned earlier, these are, number one, Palestinian people who deserve to live in freedom and dignity, and number two, these are the cream of the Palestinian society. We are talking about the top political, military, and intellectual leaders of the Palestinian people. So, of course, every major Palestinian institution is trying its best to release these people from Israeli prisons. In the case of the Palestinian Authority, it's always being blackmailed by the Americans and the Israelis because of the issue of the Palestinian prisoners, because Israel always claims that these Palestinian prisoners are terrorists, and therefore it always pressures the Palestinian Authority not to provide any assistance to the families of these Palestinian prisoners. Sometimes the Israeli government withholds Palestinian taxes, because usually Israel collects tax and then hands over to the Palestinian Authority its share of the tax. They hold these tax money in order to pressure the Palestinian Authority not to pay any assistance to the families of the Palestinian prisoners. And in fact, I would say that the moral responsibility to help the Palestinian prisoners lies not only on the shoulders of the Palestinian political institutions and Palestinian resistance groups, but also on every free individual and institution in the world. It's the role of groups like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and other international human rights groups to always speak about these, Palestinians suffering in Israeli jails silently. It is only through Palestinian resistance that the world knew that there are actually 5,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails who deserve freedom. So I believe the international community has a role to play in demanding the freedom of these people. Okay, Fatima Khan, how come Palestinian prisoners get the right to learn and write in jail? This is an achievement that has been earned by the Palestinian prisoners through a long struggle. Since the start of the Israeli occupation, Israel has exercised all sorts of restrictions on the Palestinians. First, treating them against international law, in violation of many international laws of prisoners of war. And second, through torture, psychological and physical. Third, through separating them from their families and communities, and denying them any basic visitation rights and other rights. But for so many years, the Palestinians inside jails protested, clashed with the Israeli prison guards, demanded their own rights, and of course pressured the Red Cross and other international institutions to get some of their basic rights. So for so many years, they continued to struggle inside prisons, make the life of the prison guards difficult, until the Israeli prison authorities started to facilitate some of the or accommodate some of the demands of these Palestinian prisoners, including, for instance, allowing them to cook for themselves sometimes, allowing some books in, allowing some writing materials, allowing them eventually to join universities, but with the condition that they join Hebrew Israeli universities and other forms of basic rights. But it's hard earned. It's not that Israel woke up overnight and felt kind to give the Palestinian prisoners these rights. Many Palestinian prisoners died in prison while staging hunger strikes and other strikes in order to get these basic rights. But of course, after any big incident like what happened October the 7th, Israel holds back any of these basic rights. What about diaspora in Asia? Are there little in percentage? Yes, the Palestinian diaspora in Asia is very little compared to that in the Arab countries or Europe and North America or Latin America. But however, there is a small community of Palestinian refugees in, for instance, Malaysia. There are at least 1,000 Palestinian refugees living here, a few hundreds living in Indonesia, some living in other Asian countries. Most of these refugees were refugees in Syria, Iraq, or sometimes Gaza, who had to relocate to a new place. So when they lost their residence in Syria, for instance, because of the war, or in Iraq because of the war, they relocated to a new place and settled temporarily or sometimes permanently in these Asian countries. But this number of Palestinian refugees is very small compared to the large communities that exist in the Middle East and in the West. Anna Khan, Israel has been breaking international law. Of course, they have. Interestingly, they signed many international conventions and laws, but they, in practice, continue to break it. Ever since its creation, did Israel face any sanctions? The United States has used the veto power in the United Nations Security Council, I think up to 88, probably 88 or 90 times. Most of them were to protect Israel. I think more than 50 times. So, no, Israel has not faced any repercussions due to its violations of international law. We remember Iraq faced repercussions. North Korea faces difficulties. Iran is facing difficulties. And most of the time, these three countries did not even break international laws. But Israel enjoys the protection of the superpower, which uses international law as it pleases. So if the US decides or feels that no need to respect international law, they just don't. Look at what's happening in Gaza right now. Many countries are signatories to the Genocide Convention. If they see a genocide, they should actually interfere to stop the genocide. That's what Yemen is doing. Yemen is interfering to stop the genocide. What did America do? They continued to veto any resolution calling for ceasefire. They vote against ceasefire in the General Assembly, and they are sending military equipment to attack Yemen in order to prevent Yemen from abiding by the Genocide Convention. So Yemen is trying to actually implement the international law, but the American administration feels that no, let the genocide continue. We want to give Israel more time to commit genocide. So yeah, in the case of the United Nations, Israel breaks international law, and the Americans help them to break international law. It's like when you have a very spoiled son, and this spoiled son wants to, when you go into a supermarket, this little spoiled child wants to break shelves, throw stones at people, and you come and protect this child from any punishment because it's your own child. That's how Israel is behaving. Kiana Khan, what was the reason for releasing many Palestinians for Gilad Shalit? Was he a Jew from a high race? The reason is that he's a soldier. Israel is a military society that glorifies the military and glorifies power. I mentioned earlier in the session about Zionism that Zionism is an ideology that emerged in Europe during the time of the rise of Nazism and fascism. And Zionism actually shares a lot of the fascist ideology elements. If you read books written by Netanyahu, for instance, who is in a way an ideal right-wing Zionist. He has written a book in the 90s called The Place Under the Sun. He glorifies power. In some passages, you feel like he's saying, we will take this land because we are powerful and we can. That's the logic Israelis use. So yeah, the Zionist society glorifies power and military power in particular. So taking a soldier, an Israeli soldier, into custody feels like an insult to them, and they work hard to release their soldiers. But in the case of Gaza now, because Netanyahu is desperate to stay in power, he does not want in any way to end the war, and he does not want to show more weakness after the failure to handle the 7 October attacks. So he's letting his military, through the Hannibal Doctrine, kill anybody, including their own prisoners in Gaza. But whatever it is, you look at what Israel is doing, they want their prisoners back. So in the case of Gilad Shalit, the Israeli society and the Israeli government wanted to release this military captive in order to tell their society that we still take care of our military. And of course, the Palestinian resistance played their cards right. They kept him for many years, and they demanded the release, number one, of all Palestinian female prisoners in Israeli jails, and number two, of many of the Palestinian prisoners with high sentences, including life sentences. But yeah, Gilad Shalit, unfortunately, Israel is a racist society, as I mentioned. Gilad Shalit is a white Israeli. Had he been a black Israeli or an Arab Israeli, things would have been very different. There are actually now, according to reports, 4 Israeli prisoners inside Gaza in the captivity of the Palestinian resistance since 2014, apart from the hundreds of prisoners who were taken on the 7th of October. There were 4 others. Israel always talks about the white one, Hadar Golden. No attention is given whatsoever to the black one or the Bedouin one, because there are other prisoners who are not white, Israeli prisoners. Israel as a society has been designed and created by the Ashkenazi Jewish Zionists. And to a very recent period, the whole society was run by these Ashkenazis. They are the military leadership, they are the leaders of economy and finance, they are the top judges, they are the top government officials. But in recent years, of course, Eastern Jews, many Mizrahim and Sephardim and others, started to get more access to power. And Netanyahu played his cards right. He utilized the plight of these Eastern Jews in order to stay in power in spite of his corruption and the many charges he's facing. So back to our story. However, the Israeli society is very divided. There is hierarchy, there is communal politics, and the whites are still on top in the Israeli society. So yeah, when Gilad Shalit was taken, I think most probably the captors who took him over, they chose him, they selected him carefully because they wanted a white Zionist Jew to be exchanged for many Palestinian prisoners. Okay, back to our discussion. Let's continue the discussion on the Palestinian land. We talked about the Palestinian people. Now let's talk about important issues pertinent to the Palestinian land. Jerusalem is at the heart of this struggle. For Jews, Christians, and Muslims, the city of Jerusalem is a holy city. In this picture, you see Al-Aqsa Mosque. Al-Aqsa Mosque, for those who are not very familiar with the geography and topography of Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque is not the building. It's not this beautiful dome of the rock with the golden dome built during the Umayyad dynasty some 1,200 years ago. Al-Aqsa Mosque is not this beautiful silver dome, Qibli Mosque, built during the same dynasty some 1,200 years ago. Al-Aqsa Mosque is not a single mosque or building within this compound. Al-Aqsa Mosque is the whole compound. You see, the walled compound is Al-Aqsa Mosque. Just like Masjid al-Haram in Mecca is not the small building of a Kaaba, is the whole area. Masjid Nabawi also is not the small green dome, it's the whole area, the whole compound. Al-Aqsa Mosque is the walled area. This is an ancient wall containing the Al-Aqsa complex or Haram al-Sharif, where so many buildings and mosques, trees, facilities exist. The city of Jerusalem, where Al-Aqsa Mosque is located, is a holy city for all monotheistic religions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dictated in Surah Al-Isra, in the first chapter, سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير. Glory be to Allah who sent his messenger in a journey by night from the Haram Mosque in Mecca to Al-Aqsa Mosque, or the farthest mosque in Jerusalem, of course, upon which we have spread our blessings to show him from our signs. The verse describes Al-Aqsa and names Al-Aqsa as the farthest mosque. It's because of the Muslim belief that Al-Aqsa was the second mosque to be built on earth after Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. So the Islamic belief is that Prophet Adam built the first mosque in Mecca and then built the second mosque in Jerusalem. And it was very far from Mecca at that ancient time. So it's described as the farthest mosque. Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa in Arabic means the farthest mosque. This very mosque is also the first Qibla for Muslims. The Muslims used to pray during the time of Prophet Muhammad towards the direction of Jerusalem for several years until revelation came to tell the Prophet to turn to Mecca, to Al-Kaaba in prayers. Al-Aqsa Mosque is also the third mosque in Islam in terms of status. The Prophet highlighted to his companions and to the Muslims that a prayer in Masjid al-Haram is equal to thousands of bounties. A prayer in Medina is has a lesser but still major bounty, and Al Masjid Al Aqsa is the third mosque in its religious status. The Prophet mentioned in one of his traditions that لا تشد الرحال إلا إلى ثلاث مساجد. If you want to travel, you can only travel on purpose to one of three mosques: Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina, and al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And there are so many other prophetic traditions mentioning Al-Aqsa Mosque and encouraging Muslims to move to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Or in one of the traditions, for instance, if you cannot visit Al-Aqsa Mosque, send some oil to lighten the lanterns inside Al-Aqsa Mosque. So if you cannot visit it, the minimum is to contribute to safeguarding Al-Aqsa Mosque. Of course, Muslims believe also that Al-Aqsa was the place of the Mi'raj of the Prophet to heavens. So the Prophet, during Isra and Mi'raj journey, traveled by night from Mecca to Medina, and from Mecca to Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, and traveled from Al-Aqsa Mosque, from this holy mosque, to heavens in the Mi'raj night with Al-Buraq, as our Muslim followers probably know. So it's a very holy mosque. The city itself is a holy city. In Islam, it's described in many verses of the Quran and in many traditions of the Prophet as the land of Barakah, Ard al-Mubarakah, or in the verse of Surah Al-Isra, إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله, to the Al-Aqsa Mosque upon which we spread barakah. It's a holy land as well, Ard Muqaddasa, as described in many places in the Quran. For many of the prophets of Islam, including the prophets of Bani Israel and other prophets, it's also the land of ribat and jihad, where the Prophet has mentioned that for many generations to come, this land will continue to have resistance and ribat, or struggle in the way of God. In one of the traditions of the Prophet, he describes that لا تزال طائفة من أمتي على الحق ظاهرين لعدوهم قاهرين لا يضرهم من خالفهم أو خذلهم. A group of my ummah, of the ummah of Prophet Muhammad, will continue to stay steadfast on truth, defeating their enemies. They will never bother about those who disappoint them or who do not help them. And when he was asked, where are these people? He said, in Baytul Maqdis, in Jerusalem, and in the vicinity of Jerusalem. So the city of Jerusalem is a very holy city for Muslims. But let's remember that the city of Jerusalem is also a very holy city for our Christian brothers and sisters. This is a map of the old city of Jerusalem. In fact, the walled old city is a property, most of it is a property of the Christian churches up until today, thousands of years after Nabi Isa, hundreds of years after the advent of Islam and the conquest of Jerusalem during the time of Umar al-Khattab, all the way until today, Islam and the Islamic states and dynasties over the years maintained the ownership of many of the holy sites in the old city of Jerusalem under the protection of the different Christian churches. In fact, until today, the keys of some of the holiest churches in Jerusalem are held by Muslim families. And it is known in history that the Patriarch of Jerusalem, when the Muslims wanted to conquer Jerusalem during the time of Caliph Umar al-Khattab, demanded that, number one, no bloodshed take place. Number two, he hands over the key of the old holy city to the Caliph himself. So Umar al-Khattab traveled from Medina, all the way from Medina to Jerusalem to receive the keys of Jerusalem. And in this oath, العهدة العمرية, the covenant of Umar, he allowed Christians to remain in the holy city, even though in the old times when conquerors take over cities and lands, they used to sometimes take over everything. He allowed the Christians to remain in the city of Jerusalem with full respect, to practice their religion, and he allowed the Jews as well to come and worship and practice their religion in the city of Jerusalem under the new Islamic administration. In fact, Umar ibn Khattab himself refused when he was offered to pray in the church in Jerusalem. He refused to perform his prayers inside the church out of respect, and he told them, if I pray here, my followers might turn this place into a mosque. And this is exactly what happened when he moved to another place. He prayed in another site, and it was turned into Masjid Umar ibn Khattab. Up until today, the place is called Masjid Umar ibn Khattab. So the Christian churches remained in the city of Jerusalem. The Christians revere Jerusalem. They consider it to be the destination of their Hajj or pilgrimage, and they have many holy sites. All different Christian denominations have access to the city of Jerusalem and worship and practice their religion in the city of Jerusalem. The Palestinian people, who are probably the most ancient Christian community in the world, continue to exist in Jerusalem and its vicinities. They have endured different dynasties and different struggles, although the Israeli restrictions make it difficult for many Palestinian Christians who had to migrate and relocate to places like North and South America. But many Palestinian Christians remain in the city of Jerusalem, steadfast, maintaining their own culture and identity. So the city is a very holy city for the Christian community as well. But it is also a holy city for the Jews. Many Jewish communities, including ancient Palestinian communities and Jewish communities in the diaspora, revered the city of Jerusalem as a holy city. And during the Ottoman period, they were allowed to practice their rituals in the city of Jerusalem, including in Ha'at al-Buraq wall, where they were allowed a small corridor to practice their religious rituals. But in 1929, under the British administration, many of these new Jewish migrant communities started to expand the territory of their place of worship, clashing with Palestinian Muslims and Christians and causing the eruption of the Buraq revolution of 1929. Before the establishment of Israel, Muslims, Christians, and Jews coexisted in peace and harmony in the city of Jerusalem, especially under the Islamic rule. Because under the Crusades and under the Kingdom of Jerusalem, run by the Christian Crusades, Muslims and Jews were both persecuted in the Holy City. Meanwhile, under Islamic rule for several centuries, the three monotheistic religions coexisted in peace and harmony in this holy city. Now, since the occupation of Jerusalem, things became difficult for the Muslim and Christian community in Jerusalem. Israel occupied at first, as you see in this map, the western part of the city of Jerusalem, almost half of the city. They established their own political and cultural institutions, in addition to several religious places in the city of Jerusalem, but they were still eager to take over the rest of Jerusalem. By 1967, Israel occupied the rest of Palestine, conquering the holy city of Jerusalem in its totality. The eastern part of Jerusalem was taken over by the Zionist state in 1967. The Israeli military forces stormed into Al-Aqsa Mosque and other holy sites in the eastern part of the city of Jerusalem. Since the occupation of East Jerusalem, Israel has been working hard to transform the identity of Jerusalem into a Jewish-only city, just like they did with Western Jerusalem. So they have devised plans to expand the Jewish control over the city of Jerusalem by creating Greater Jerusalem. If you look at the map, Jerusalem is in the heart of the West Bank, in the center. So they want to cut the West Bank by establishing a greater city of Jerusalem. Of course, they have been stealing a lot of Palestinian agricultural land, especially rural lands, to expand the city by building many of their illegal settlements like Har Homa and others. They have forced out many Palestinian communities from their neighborhoods in the city of Jerusalem. Very recently, in 2021, we have all witnessed how the Israeli government was persecuting and harassing the people of Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan neighborhoods, two of the neighborhoods of the city of Jerusalem in East Jerusalem. The Israeli policy, the public and secret policy is actually to empty the city of Jerusalem of its Arab population. The idea is to turn Jerusalem into a so-called eternal united capital of the Zionist state and the Jewish people. How to achieve that? Through Judaization policies. This is what we mean by Judaization. Judaization in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, for instance, means what? Judaization of Al-Aqsa means forcing out Muslims from the mosque, erecting Jewish temples inside the mosque, digging tunnels under the mosque. There are at least 37 Jewish tunnels under Al-Aqsa Mosque. They have built synagogues and other buildings under Al-Aqsa Mosque. They have made the structure of Al-Aqsa very shaky. And they have been competing since the 1990s for ownership of the Al-Aqsa on the top of the mosque, not only under the mosque. They have been trying hard to split the time and space of Al-Aqsa Mosque. They have done that in the Abraham Mosque, the mosque of Nabi Ibrahim in Hebron, in south of the West Bank, in the south of the West Bank. In 1994, an illegal Israeli settler opened fire at Muslim congregations inside the Abraham Mosque while they were performing morning prayer, subh prayer, killing more than 30 of them. And the Israeli government, which facilitated this massacre, intervened to protect Jewish influence inside the Abraham Mosque. Eventually, they have devised a plan to partition the mosque, spatial and temporal division of the mosque. So Muslims can have some of the time of their mosque, while the Jews can have other times in the mosque. Muslims can have access only to certain locations in the mosque, while Jews have certain locations inside the mosque. I mean, this is crazy, I know. Dividing a mosque for others to worship according to their different rituals, but this is what Israel has been doing. They want the whole of Palestine, they want the whole of the West Bank, they want the whole of Jerusalem, and they want the religious sites in Jerusalem. Why? One reason is that these religious sites are a symbol of sovereignty and a symbol of identity. They want to wipe out any Palestinian identity, Muslim or Christian. They want to only erect Jewish identity in the city of Jerusalem, and that's what we mean by Judaization. So many plans have been devised to divide Al-Aqsa Mosque, to harass the Muslim congregations in the mosque. You have seen all the videos and the pictures of how the Israeli police treats Muslim congregations in the mosque, how Jewish fanatics come and storm the mosque on daily basis, try to raise Israeli flags inside the mosque, desecrate the mosque. Sometimes Israeli police officers shooting Muslims inside the mosque while they're performing their prayers, especially in the holy month of Ramadan, putting the mosque to arson, like what happened in 1969 when a Zionist Australian came into the mosque and burned Al-Aqsa Mosque, burning to ashes the historical minbar of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, minbar that was brought by Salahuddin al-Ayyubi but made by Nuruddin Zinki some 1,000 years ago. Many atrocities have been committed in the city of Jerusalem, even inside Al-Aqsa Mosque itself, in order to turn the identity of Jerusalem into a Jewish identity. The same is happening to the West Bank. Coming to the next topic, illegal settlements in the West Bank and the separation wall. The same Judaization policy is in place. But this time around, not only for the holy city of Jerusalem, but for the whole territory of the West Bank. The West Bank is some 5,000 kilometers square. It is the bigger chunk of the supposed Palestinian state. It is the heartland of Palestine, where most of the ancient history has taken place. And to the Jewish settler community, it is the place where the ancient Jewish states existed, Judea and Samaria, in places like Hebron, Jerusalem, Nablus, and their surroundings. So many fanatic Jewish settlers have been moving into the West Bank over the last 3 decades, trying to create a new um, identity for the territories of the West Bank. They have been faced, of course, by strong Palestinian resistance, but this resistance has been very painful. Palestinians are killed in the West Bank on a daily basis. At least 240 Palestinians were killed before 7 October in 2023 by Israeli military or police officers, sometimes by illegal Israeli settlers who carry arms and who are full of chauvinistic, violent ideas. The Israeli settler colonial regime has, to a large extent, orchestrated one of the most massive land theft and identity transformation policies of modern times. They are stealing Palestinian agricultural land. They are burning Palestinian crops, especially olive trees, which sometimes can be 1 or 2,000 years old. They are destroying Palestinian houses, banning Palestinians from building, especially in the city of Jerusalem, demolishing Palestinian homes, cutting Palestinian trees, burning Palestinian children to death, like what happened to Muhammad Abu Khdir. They are shooting randomly at Palestinians, committing extrajudicial killings almost on daily basis in the West Bank, and devising plans to cut the Palestinian communities in the West Bank into so many small communities through the many checkpoints. There is a short movie on Netflix called Farha, if I'm not mistaken. I think Farha is another one. Farha is another, and is about Nakba. There is another movie called Present or The Present. You should watch it. It talks about the life of Palestinians in the West Bank who pass through Israeli checkpoints on daily basis. There are more than 300 military checkpoints scattered all over the West Bank. Israel, in order to steal the Palestinian land, has devised many strategies. One of them is dividing the West Bank into so many small Bantustans. There are big Palestinian communities in urban areas like Hebron, Nablus, Ramallah, and other places. So they isolate them from the rural areas so that they steal the rural areas in a gradual basis. They have also erected a 730 kilometers wall that the Palestinians call the apartheid wall or the separation wall around the West Bank, but not outside the border of the West Bank. Most of the time inside the border of the West Bank, cutting Palestinian towns and cities, especially here in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and other places, to make it easier to steal Palestinian land and to contain Palestinian communities inside open air prisons. The ICJ, in International Court of Justice, ruled in an advisory ruling in 2004 that the separation wall is an illegal wall, but Israel did not bother about international law. Again, how will the Palestinians establish a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza? If this illegal separation wall continues to exist, and if all these illegal settlements are spreading, and if 700,000 illegal Israeli settlers have moved into the West Bank over the last 30 years, how exactly are the Palestinians going to establish a state in the West Bank and Gaza when Israel is committing all of this? And when the Palestinians come and demand their rights through the 7 October attack or any other form of resistance, the whole world gets angry at them. How exactly will the Palestinians establish an independent state in the West Bank and Gaza? The territories recognized by the whole international community, by so many international resolutions, as the future Palestinian state. The Palestinian political leadership has been negotiating for decades to achieve an independent Palestinian state, but it yielded no sovereign Palestinian state, no viable Palestinian state. And a few days ago, many of you probably have seen what Netanyahu said on on air. He was saying there will be no Palestinian state in the land from the river to the sea. Everything will be under Israeli control. And in another interview or speech, he said he was bragging that he was proud that he was the political leader who denied the Palestinians establishing a Palestinian state. How exactly can the Palestinians live in peace and freedom and achieve emancipation if no form of state can be allowed? Israeli settler colonial occupation is the root cause of the whole problem. Israel was designed for settler colonial communities. They came over to Palestine, they stole our land, they established a state in 1948 in 80% of Palestine. They robbed an already made country. We had culture, we had economy, we had banks, we had cinemas, we had life, we had a police force, we had almost everything. They stole it all. In 1967, they stole the remaining parts. And now, for the last 30 years, while Palestinian political leadership has been negotiating with them a peaceful resolution, a peaceful settlement, they have been stealing rural land bit by bit. They have been containing Palestinian urban areas through the separation wall and checkpoints and other forms bit by bit. And they have been Judaizing the identity of Jerusalem and the West Bank bit by bit. But that's not all. What is happening in Gaza is equally horrible. You have seen what's happening in Gaza in the last 3 months. This is a crime that has been taking place for more than 75 years. In the case of Gaza, it was attacked in 1956 when Egypt was attacked by Israel. It was again attacked since 1967. And for many years, the Gazan people responded and resisted. They were able to free Gaza from direct military occupation in 2005, but Israel decided to contain Gaza and create some sort of an open-air prison, as described by Israeli journalist, the late Yuri Avniri, who described Gaza as an open-air prison. They continue to subject Gaza to all forms of torture. They experiment their weapons on Gaza and the people of Gaza. In 2006, 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, and again 2023 up until today, they continue to experiment all sorts of illegally and internationally banned weapons and illegal weapons like white phosphorus, one-ton bombs, all sorts of American-sponsored, American-manufactured bombs that wipe out entire populations, that wipe out entire neighborhoods. They continue to experiment all of this in Gaza, killing tens of thousands of Palestinians, trying hard to ethnically cleanse Gaza from its original inhabitants and from the Palestinian refugees who resided in Gaza in 1947, 1948. This torture will make it very difficult, of course, for the Palestinians to establish any form of a state. However, the torture, the atrocities in the West Bank and Gaza are not everything. There is a lot of suffering that is taking place inside Israel. More than 1.5 million Palestinians have become citizens of Israel, unwillingly, of course. In 1948, their land was taken over by Israel, a new government emerged. They could not leave Palestine. Luckily, many of them just remained, facing, of course, the risk of massacres and genocide, but many of them remained, and eventually their numbers grew. They have become citizens of Israel, but they have always remained as second-class citizens of Israel, subject to all forms of torture and humiliation by the Israeli regime. They face real apartheid. It's documented in Ben White's two books, The Israeli Apartheid and Palestinians in Israel. It's good to have a look at these two books. And we've seen since the start of the Israeli military operation in Gaza that the Palestinians inside Israel are not able even to post anything on social media. Sometimes if they even like a post on social media, they can end up in Israeli detention. And I'm sure you have seen the video of the Palestinian woman who was arrested because she posted something on the 7th of October on her WhatsApp status. The peace process was the final attempt by the international community to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. However, those who have been following the details of the Palestinian struggle know very well that the Oslo Accord and the process that resulted from that deal was more or less a trap. Israel was never interested in real peace. They were interested in security and in finishing off Palestinian intifada inside the West Bank and Gaza, and in ending Palestinian struggle and resistance from the diaspora. Because of many factors, the Palestinians ended up agreeing to a peaceful settlement that guarantees a state for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, less than some 20% of the historical Palestinian land, while they recognized Israel as an independent state. But Israel never fulfilled its promises. The deal that was supposed to be fulfilled by 1999 continued to be expanded and prolonged, and the Palestinian Authority that emerged as a temporary transitional authority turned into a dysfunctional autonomous administration that controls the Palestinians and prevents any form of real resistance to end Israeli occupation, while waiting for the goodwill of the Israelis to help us create our independent state. This, I believe, will never happen. The Palestinians have to earn their freedom through their own struggle and the help of the international community, the international solidarity movement, and the serious parties in the international community that are serious about supporting the Palestinian struggle, like South Africa and Yemen. Thank you very much for your patience. I tried in these slides to highlight many aspects of the Palestinian issue, including the status of the Palestinian refugees and the right of return, the Palestinian prisoners and their plight in Israeli prisons, the Palestinian land, especially the city of Jerusalem, the Israeli Judaization efforts, the West Bank, and how the separation wall and illegal settlements have been making life difficult for the Palestinians, the blockade in Gaza and the ongoing genocide, as well as Israeli apartheid policies and the peace process that has not resulted in a free Palestine. I open the floor for another round of questions before we conclude our discussion, and I apologize to you if our lecture today lasted very long. Okay, we have a question here from Mariam Zakia. Why are there still Muslim Western scholars that encourage pacifism when it comes to Palestine, and even goes on to say we should share Masjid al-Aqsa compound with the Zionists for them to build the temple? Well, I guess these so-called Muslim Western scholars are supposed to answer these questions. I do not subscribe to their own thoughts. It's up to them to be pacifist, but they cannot dictate how the Palestinians perceive their own struggle. They cannot also dictate how Muslims perceive al-Masjid al-Aqsa, or how Palestinian Christians and Christians perceive the city of Jerusalem and the Church of Holy Sepulchre. If they want to share their own homes with outside invaders, it's up to them. But in the case of the Palestinians, the issue has never been about living in peace and harmony or coexistence with other faiths. We have lived in peace and harmony, Muslim, Jew, and Christian, in Palestine for hundreds of years. It was only after the Zionist regime was established in 1947, 1948 that this kind of coexistence became very difficult. Jewish supremacy, Zionist domination and hegemony make it very difficult for the Palestinians, be it Muslim, Christian, or even Jew, to live in peace and worship their God peacefully. So the Palestinians are not against passive resistance or peaceful resolutions of the struggle, But if they don't work, if these approaches don't work, then the Palestinians are not expected to accept humiliation and sit aside. They will resist. Anna Khan, is it correct that the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Sophronius, I think his name was Sophronius, told Khalif Umar not to allow Jews from outside, but Khalif Umar allowed them to visit their holy site, but not to buy any land? Now, this is a point of dispute. There are many historical accounts. I am not an expert on this subject matter, but as far as my readings say, the Romans have banned the Jews from staying in the city of Jerusalem. There were many clashes around the early years of the first millennia. The Jews had some sort of autonomy. We mentioned that, if you remember, in the first and second lectures, the Jews had some sort of autonomy in the first and second centuries BC, AD, but the Romans have, to a large extent, forced them out of their places in certain parts of Jerusalem and Palestine. They eventually went into diaspora. Now, when the Muslims took over Palestine during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the 7th century AD, he allowed all worshippers, Muslim, Christian, and Jew, to worship in Jerusalem. And in his covenant, I think it allows everybody to worship. Did the Christian patriarch ask him to ban Jews from coming in? I'm not sure about that, but I think many of the Orthodox Christian legacies do not like the Jewish communities particularly. We have all heard of, for instance, the pogroms that happened to the Jews in many parts of Eastern Europe, including Russia, Ukraine, and elsewhere, probably because of this enmity. But did the Patriarch Sophronius mention that to Umar al-Khattab? I'm not very sure about that. I need to do some more research on that. Samara Jews, or I think Samaritans, Samara Jews, want to build their temple mount in Nablus, and one community wants to build it in Al-Aqsa compound. Who is stronger in their ideology? Of course, the Samara Jews are Palestinian Jews. They live around the city of Jerusalem. There are a few hundreds of them. They live around Nablus. There are a few hundreds of them. They see Nablus as the holy city of Judaism. They are not that powerful, and Israeli Jews see them as infidels or as deviant. So to us, outsiders, to me, they are Jews, and other Israelis are Jews. But within the Jewish communities, they have their own divisions, of course. Religiously, they have, the Jewish communities in Palestine and worldwide have Orthodox Jews, Reformed Jews, secular Jews, and many other Jewish groups. The Samara Jews in particular are a very, very small Palestinian Jewish community that exists in Nablus. The majority of the Jewish communities that run Israel see Jerusalem as a holy city, but in recent years, the religious Zionist Jews who subscribe to messianic ideas of rebuilding Temple Mount are causing a lot of stress and tensions in Jerusalem. People like Ben Gvir and Smotrich and other religious Zionist groups, they want to speed up the end of history by destroying Al-Aqsa Mosque and building Temple Mount. But the problem for them is that there are no historical evidences showing where Temple Mount was, if it existed, if it ever existed, and how should it be rebuilt. And many of the other Jewish communities, especially in the Orthodox sphere, are very uncomfortable with this idea. In fact, there was a fatwa to ban the Jewish people from entering Haram Sharif or Al-Aqsa Mosque compound that was changed, I think, only by 19 95, their rabbis started to allow them to visit Al-Aqsa Mosque. So it's a point of religious dispute within the Jewish community itself, and it's power that is speaking, actually, not a religious or intellectual debate. It's the powerful right-wing Zionist groups in Israel that are trying to speed up the end of history by creating, rebuilding the Temple Mount and creating a big war with the rest of the world. Maryam Zakiya, why is Mahmoud Abbas still in power when he seems not to be doing his job properly? How frequently are elections done in Palestine? We discussed in the previous lecture, when we talked about the Palestinian people and the Palestinian political system, that the Palestinians had a new political institution called the Palestinian Authority, established in 1994. They had the first parliamentary elections and presidential elections in 1996. Of course, it was only representative of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. Yasser Arafat won that elections, and Fatah won the majority in the parliament. It was boycotted by Hamas. In 2006, we had the second parliamentary elections. Hamas won a big majority. 2005, after the demise of Yasser Arafat, we had presidential elections in the West Bank and Gaza, and President Abbas won the elections, mainly, I believe, because Hamas boycotted that elections. But 2006, Hamas joined the parliamentary elections and won a huge majority, 64% of the parliament. This created the dysfunctional Palestinian Authority. The president from one political group, the prime minister from the opposing political group, and the international community came in to interfere. So the Americans and the West sided by Mahmoud Abbas. Several Muslim countries sided by Hamas and Ismail Haniyeh's government, and we started to have internal Palestinian political division. By 2007, this political division turned into a geographic division with a government for Hamas in Gaza and a government for Fatah in the West Bank. Since that year until today, Mahmoud Abbas continues to claim that Hamas is a rebel group that has seized power illegally in the Gaza Strip. Hamas, on the other side, says that they won the elections and that Abbas did not allow them to exercise power, and he has dismissed the parliament illegally. He actually has not only dismissed the parliament, but also has reformed the judiciary without consulting the parliament. But anyway, there is a real constitutional crisis in Palestine since 2007. Only because there is a direct military occupation of the West Bank by Israel, and there is an American intervention to protect the Palestinian Authority model, especially in the West Bank. Only because of this, that the Palestinians have not been able to unite and create their own united political front. Mahmoud Abbas has been avoiding any national elections. Many times the other Palestinian factions suggested a national reconciliation, including in 2021 when they agreed to have parliamentary elections in May 2021. Only a few weeks before the elections, President Abbas cancelled those elections. So we have a stagnation in the political forces in Palestine. We need such elections actually to refresh our political leadership. But the problem with President Mahmoud Abbas is not only not holding elections, because we are under occupation. And I think, to me, elections is not the solution to our problem. The solution is resisting until we end occupation. But to President Mahmoud Abbas, holding elections might mean losing power. So he won't go for it. And the problem, I believe, is not only elections. The problem is his political ideology. He does not believe in resistance. He believes only in a peaceful process, which will eventually, through diplomatic pressure, yield in an independent Palestinian state. He is the architect of the Oslo Accord, upon which the Palestinian Authority was established. So in a way, he's protecting his own political legacy. But his political legacy is not going to result in an independent Palestinian state. I mean, any sane academic knows that. But he's trying. He's trying his best. He's 88 years old now, and he's the absolute leader of the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, and Fatah. So, of course, if he leaves the political scene, Abruptly, there will be a real constitutional crisis and a power vacuum within the Palestinian political system, which is a problem. So he has to actually speed up reconciliation. Okay. How can we send gifts to Al-Aqsa Mosque? How will we know that our gifts has reached Al-Aqsa? I'll give you this shocking figures. One single Israeli NGO raised $54 million in less than 3 months from America and other countries sympathetic to Israel. One single NGO raised more than $50 million for the Jewish community and Judaization efforts. If you combine all the efforts of the Israeli Jewish NGOs, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. If you add to that the budget allocated by the municipality of Jerusalem as well as the Israeli state to Judaize the city of Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque, we're talking about billions of dollars spent every year. How much do the Muslims all over the world, Christians as well, who support Palestine, spend to protect the identity of Palestine, the Islamic and Christian identity of Palestine? I don't have an exact figure, but I assure you, it's a few $1 million. If you add the contributions of the different governments, especially the OIC governments, it will be probably a few tens of millions, hundreds of millions. It's nothing compared to the money that Israel and its Zionist network is spending to Judaize the city of Jerusalem. So whatever contribution is, of course, appreciated by the Palestinian people, but it's not enough. We have to send as much as we can. The Prophet encouraged Muslims in the ancient time, if they cannot help, Al-Aqsa by visiting it, to at least send some oil to lighten the lanterns of Al-Aqsa Mosque. Today, Al-Aqsa Mosque is being converted into a Jewish temple. The building, the structure, the identity is being demolished, is being destroyed by the Zionist state of Israel. So money alone is not enough, of course. We have to put political pressure, diplomatic pressure. We have to send money, to send aid, to send contributions. We have to protect the Palestinian identity. We have to protect the Palestinian culture, the Islamic and Christian heritage in Jerusalem and in the rest of Palestine. So much has to be done. How to send? There are so many channels, government channels, NGO channels, individual channels. If you are living in a country that provides a passport that can travel to Jerusalem, try maybe individually to go there and help the Palestinian community. But if your government does not recognize Israel and you don't have a political relation with Israel, don't go. I don't encourage that, of course. We don't want more Muslim countries normalizing relations with Israel. But there are so many ways to help. Maybe this lecture is not the best platform to discuss them, but there are so many ways and channels to help. We have to start helping. Thank you so much for all your questions, Anna Khan. Sir, you said there is a synagogue under Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Is it open for public? There are 37 tunnels under Al-Aqsa Mosque, including several synagogues. A few months ago, the Israeli government, led by Netanyahu, organized a cabinet meeting under Al-Aqsa Mosque. There are many synagogues. Some of them are open, of course, for public, but not Muslim public. They're open for Jewish communities to come and perform their Jewish rituals under Al-Aqsa Mosque. With that, I come to the end of this discussion. We have discussed today several major issues in the Palestinian struggle. We are not done yet. We will have an additional lecture next week in which we will discuss the contemporary developments of the Palestinian issue, especially the geopolitical dimensions. And I believe this current lecture is the last live broadcast of our discussion. Next final lecture will be an interactive lecture through a different platform where we can actually discuss in more details, hear your questions, and probably try to discuss approaches and solutions for the Palestinian struggle for emancipation and freedom of both the Palestinian people and the Palestinian land. Thank you so much for your patience, for your interest in the topic, and I hope that you will not stop at these lectures, but will go and do more research, more reading, more findings, in order to be able to contribute directly to liberating Palestine and ending the occupation of this holy land, soon, inshallah. Thank you so much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.